From the Australian Labor Party, Deb Foskey from the Greens Party, Darren Chester from the Coalition's Party, Sonia Buckley, an independent candidate, and Kerri Brewer from the United Australia Party. The Wellington Shire Council Mayor Alan Hall, Councillor Ripper, I think, and now I would like to invite Chloe Bethune to do the acknowledgement of country.
Doesn't have a button. Okay then. Good evening everyone, and welcome to our Youth Focus Q&A with candidates hoping to represent us in the Australian Parliament. My name, or Innie, is Chloe Bethune, and I'm a Noongar girl from the Wajari mob of the Yamatji Nations in Western Australia, and my totem is a dingo. Today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather on today, or Bunawinjamara. We are on the Brackalong land, which is one of the 5 language groups under the Gunai Kurnai. Our elders hold the key to our culture, and I'd like to acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging, from the Gunai Kurnai and other Aboriginal lands. Thank you, and please enjoy tonight.
Thank you, Chloe. The young people who put up their hand to be a part of the Youth Council are young people who want to serve their community. We actively work towards getting to know our community better and find ways to advocate for the issues more important to our local youth we represent, sharing the good stories too. Most importantly, we try to provide opportunities where young people can voice their own issues, ideas, and opinions. With a dramatic increase, the first-time voters registering the last year to partake in the marriage equality vote, we felt that this upcoming federal election was a great opportunity for us to hear from the candidates who are hoping to represent us in Australian Parliament over the next 4 years. We believe that us young people, we have important, strong ideas and concerns and are eager to learn more about the way our government works in Australia and how we can influence them by being active and involved citizens.
Before we start, I would just like to remind everyone on the issues that the federal government is responsible for: defence, foreign policy, immigration, trade and commerce, airports and air safety, post and telecommunications, employment and unemployment strategies, national public works, social services such as pensions and family support, Medicare and health funding, post-secondary education, and currency. While our questions this afternoon only touch on a few issues within this brief, there are many more that are not able to be shared. We invite people who would like to stay on after the panel to talk with our candidates to do so. We also invite people to log on online to the live stream and add any questions and or thoughts throughout the following Q&A panel. I'd like to invite our candidates to introduce themselves. So to get started, we will have 3 minutes to each candidate to introduce themselves. So we're going to start with Antoinette Holm.
Let me turn that on and then you can all hear me. You might notice that there's an L in my name, and that's because it's Danish. So it's Antoinette Holm. If you're properly Danish, you say Holm apparently, but we tend to say Antoinette Holm. Okay. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here this evening, and thank you for that lovely acknowledgement of country. Elections are curious things. They are an integral part of the democratic process, but they're also something that many citizens love to hate. I love them. I love them because it gives us an opportunity to step away from the pragmatic realities of governance and actually talk about politics. And you probably guessed, I enjoy talking about politics. It's lots of fun. We get to reflect upon what we do. We get to reflect upon why we do it. We get to take a moment to place ourselves at the centre of something that is far bigger and ask, what is the Australia I want to be part of. I'm representing a party, the Labor Party, that places people at the centre of an economy, a party that sees value in the collective and believes in the idea that together we make a better world. If you've had a chance to look at my bio, you'll see that I describe myself as a teacher and a writer. This is the quick answer. It's a shorthand way to describe a complex and diverse adulthood. I went to university when I was 19 after leaving school at the age of 17. I found I loved university and I continued on with studies learning to write and to teach, to write academically but also creatively. People tend to think that the gig economy was invented with Uber, but it is something that women and young people specifically experience. It certainly characterised my lifetime of paid work. So my young and adult life has been characterised by casual or contract positions. So when people ask me what I do, I find it difficult to answer. I've taught in schools and at universities, and mostly in foundational bridging courses. That means I work with people who want to go to university, who want to be able to study but don't necessarily meet the requirements to get in or have the skills to be able to do it. My writing covers academic writing, but I also write other types of things. I've written journal articles and I've written novels. I've run for Parliament because a robust democracy requires a strong opposition. For us to exercise real choice and be able to vote for change, we need someone to vote for. I was also unable to walk away from what I see as real need. I could not stand by. I could no longer leave all of the things we see around us, to be sorted or not, as the case tends to have been, by others. We all have our moments to stand up, and this was mine. This is mine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I'll ask Deb Foskey from the Greens Party to introduce herself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me today, and thanks, Chloe, for that welcome to country. And thanks, Rebecca and Ivan, for hosting this. And it's a big privilege to be able to speak to you. I suppose that some of you are about to vote for the first time, and I hope that you find that an exciting prospect, because it is something that so many people are take for granted, and yet it is, for other people in many other countries would consider it a great privilege and are fighting for that right even now. I'm standing in Victoria for the federal election for the first time, but some of you I met for the state election campaign last November. So I look as though I'm a bit of a professional candidate, don't I? And you might wonder why someone would do that, because let's face it, it's not likely that I'm going to win this seat. So why am I doing it? You might wonder. I've given up 6 weeks of my life. I've moved away from my small farm, which is up near the Victorian-New South Wales border. I've left someone else in charge of the animals and the garden up there, and made my life down here, because it is very, very difficult to be in a campaign when you live 2 hours from the nearest town. So that's how keen I am. And why am I so keen? And why isn't a young person here? I would give my eye teeth for a young Greens candidate to be sitting here. And I look around you and I think, which of you? So just be aware that I've got my eye on you. And I'm standing because I actually love being in the thick of what's the biggest game in town. I have been an elected parliamentarian before in the ACT, so I've sort of got a bit of an idea of what it's all about. I'm sure it's nothing like the big house, which Darren knows a lot more about, but I do understand the cut and thrust of politics. And I was a Greens parliamentarian there, and what I like about being Green Parliament is I can live my truth. I can speak my truth. I can act with integrity. And right now, I think we're at a time in history where this election is an incredibly important thing. And I'm not sure that everyone in Gippsland's got that idea, actually, from standing in pre-polling booths. But we were told last year by the IPCC that we've got 12 years to turn around the way we behave in terms of emitting greenhouse gases if we want to keep the temperature rise below 1.5 C. As it turns out, actually only the Greens, and this is an assessment by everybody who's had a look, have the policies to do that. So again, an amazing time, an important election, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Deb. And now I'll ask Darren Chester to please tell us a bit about himself.
Well, thank you, Beck, and thank you, Ivan, and particularly thank you, Beck, since you go to my old high school. It's great to be in your company again tonight. And I did say in my maiden speech to Parliament 11 years ago that it is a great nation where the son of a sail plumber can find themselves in such a magnificent surroundings with such an important job to do. And I say that because I want to encourage the young people in the room and those that might be listening tonight to not put inhibitors on yourself, to not restrict your view of the world or your ambition because you go to a local state school or you come from a small country town. Anything's possible for people from Gippsland, particularly young people from Gippsland. We live in the best region of what I regard as the greatest nation in the world. And we should be proud of where we come from, and I'm proud of where I come from, and that is quite humble beginnings here in Sale. And I've had the opportunity through the goodwill of the people of Gippsland to represent you in federal parliament for more than 10 years now. And I must say it concerns me that it is fashionable in the media and in the community more generally to be a bit pessimistic and negative at the moment, whereas I have a completely different view. I sincerely believe the best days of Gippsland lie ahead of us. The best days of Gippsland will be achieved by the resilience, the vision, the determination, the capabilities of the young people who live in our community today, working in partnership with the generations that went before them. No one is a font of all wisdom. We failed as a nation, I believe, to recognise the wisdom and the knowledge of our traditional owners when the European settlement first occurred. We're only now just getting back to that. And so I look at the young people in the room and say, we can learn from you and you can learn from me. There's huge opportunities for us to achieve great things here in Gippsland in the future. I understand why other people in the room are running for Parliament. I absolutely understand, because it is the greatest job you could ever do for your community. Now, not everyone gets to win, not everyone gets to actually make it to the Parliament, but there are ways you can make a difference in your community, whether it's at local level, as a volunteer, at local government level, at state government level, or if you're lucky enough, at federal government level. There are so many ways you can make a difference in your community, street by street, town by town. So the reason I got into politics was to try and make a difference in the community, and in some ways I believe I've achieved that. In other ways I believe there's more work to be done. It's one of those unusual jobs, federal politics, where you're never really satisfied. You never actually get everything done that you want to get done in the 3-year term. There's always more to be done. I'm very proud of the fact we've secured incredible investment in infrastructure in Gippsland over the last 6 years. I'm proud of the fact that we've seen improvements to our services, particularly mental health services in our community. And I'm proud of the progress we made towards respect towards our gay and lesbian community through the marriage plebiscite, which eventually got through. It wasn't pretty in the process, but we eventually got it through. So I'm proud of some of the achievements that we've been able to manage together, but I recognise there's still more to be done. I'm here tonight to listen and to respect your views and to hear from you and look forward to some of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darren. And we'll go to Sonia Buckley to tell us her story.
Thank you very much. So I'm standing as an independent. I'm from Benambra, which is up near Omeo in the high country. My forebears have been here since first settlement back in the early 1800s, so Australia is very dear to my heart, and I have a father who is also very involved in politics, and it's been a great motivator for me. And you as future voters, it's good to sit down and talk with you, to say how important your vote will be. Your input to the future of our country and our planet will change and shape our future. So you should take that responsibility very seriously. Now, I believe that voting should be a right and a duty. It should not be mandatory in my view, and especially not under threat of prosecution, and which is what's happening at present, because I have very strong libertarian values, and I value freedom, and I think that it should be an honour, a duty and a right to do that, and we should have people that are worth voting for. And I also believe that one vote should equal one value. I think the current preferential system that we have encourages backroom deals and manipulations. And so I would hope that in the future you would look at this and insist on changing the political system that we're operating under. So, I believe the power is with the people. And I think that the choices that you make now in your life will make a difference to what happens to us. At present, I'm a bit concerned for young people. I think they've been adversely affected psychologically, and especially with some of the media hype and some of the political parties who tend to fearmonger. Especially around climate change. Now, I'm not a climate change denier. In fact, I'm very much in favour of having policies in place that will ensure that we have a bright future, a cleaner, healthier planet. Yes, our governments do focus very heavily on economics, and I think that that's understandable. We are a very wealthy and great country to live in, but we need to start thinking long term, instead of just rotations of 3 to 4 years when we have politicians who come up with these great ideas and it's gone by the next rotation looking for the next vote. I'm also very anti-splash the cash, where the major parties say, oh, we'll give you this money, we'll give you that money, all the while knowing that they may not be able to deliver on that depending on who's holding government. Yeah, so I think we can do much better. We've got a lot to look forward to. I agree with Darren on that, because even though some of you are feeling a bit disillusioned and disappointed, or even angry maybe, I want you to feel motivated by that. And I believe that you're the generation with the power at your fingertips. I mean, the internet's an incredible tool for information, and I think young people will have the creative solutions. They'll be able to solve the world's problems, and you'll be a part of that. It's probably a big weight to sort of think about, but when you really look at it, it's a very positive stage of our future that we're going into. And as a politician, they should be the ones that are motivating you to do that and to stay focused and giving you the tools and the policies around that, where we can make those changes happen. So it's a bit heavy for you kids to be thinking about all of that, because you're teenagers, and it should be a time for having fun and not worrying about the weight that's on your shoulders about climate change and the such. But I would like to think that those things will strengthen and motivate you, and we can solve the problems collectively. So I won't win this day. I'm pretty sure Darren will, and I wish him all the very best. He's in a safe seat. But what motivated me to stand up was this very thing, to be able to plant seeds in young minds that in the future, one of you who may be a candidate or a future politician or someone who solves a problem through technological means, that I might have said one thing that motivates you to do that. So I would like to say that I wish each one of you happy futures. I hope that you'll stand up, you'll be counted, and be accountable, but most of all, just be happy and have a good life. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And now we will move to Kerri Brewer, our final candidate.
Okay, thank you.
Once again, thanks for having me here tonight and inviting me along. So I'm a mum and a grandma. I have 3 children and 4 grandchildren, and I've lived in Sale for 37 years. I'm a nurse by trade, and I work at the moment out at Royal Freemasons in aged care. So that's pretty much my introduction. I've had a lot of life experiences. One of the reasons I've been thinking about politics for many years and I've been interested in getting involved. But one of the catalysts for me was actually last year when Malcolm Turnbull got booted out. That really did it for me when I was watching that on TV. I went, oh, that's enough. That's enough. We've had enough Prime Ministers in a short amount of years. And so from that moment I started to look into it a bit more seriously. So I looked into a few of the parties and I looked into the UAP. I liked some of their policies. I got in contact with a director here in Victoria and spoke to her, and she asked me would I put in a nomination form. So I did, and I had to go for an interview in Melbourne. There was about 12 people vying for the job. Call it a job. And anyway, a week later they rang me and they said that I had it. And the first question I asked was, why? Why did you give it to me, just as a matter of interest? And I said, please don't say you gave it to me just because I'm a woman, because that's just not good enough. And I know they're crying out in politics, we want more women, we want more women. But you know what? I don't want to be there just because I'm a woman, because that's just tokenism. You have to be there for more, and you have to be passionate about why you want to be there. And it is, of course we want to see more women in there, but we want to see the balance. That's what we're looking for. And so that was my motivation to get into it. It's been a baptism of fire the last couple of months, but I've been really enjoying it. I love to learn, and I've been learning a whole lot. Real eye-opener. And I believe that I want to make a difference. That's why I want to make a difference to everyone's lives, not just certain groups or certain people, but to every single person that lives in Australia. I'd want to make a difference somehow in their life, because I think life can be pretty hard at times, and I know I've experienced incredible lows and highs as well, and I know how hard life can be, and I just really would love to get in there and help people to have their life a little easier, and I think that's what politicians and the government should be doing, is not trying to make our lives harder, but to make our lives easier, because it's hard enough just on its own. And I also think they have to look at their moral compass, a lot of them, and look at what they're doing, and they have to start to do what's right and not what's popular. And I just really think they need a bit of a shake-up, and I just want to be that one that shakes them up. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all our candidates. So let's get started. So during the session, a young questionnaire will be invited up to the lectern to ask their question, and the panel will be given 90 seconds to respond to that question. We have youth councillors Beck and Ali up the back in orange t-shirts, and they will hold up a yellow card when you get to 60 seconds and a red card when you get to 90 seconds. When you see that red card, we ask that you please finish your question. And, if you don't, that's what our job's to be, to cut you off. So, fantastic. So our first question comes from Ben Harms.
Good evening, candidates. My question's for Antoinette Holm and then for all the other candidates as well. The Adani coal mine will be Australia's largest coal mine and emit more CO2 than the whole country of Belgium. Yet the Labor Party claim they will take serious action on climate change if elected. Ms Holm, do you personally support the Adani coal mine? And how can Labor have a legitimate stance on tackling climate change without reversing the approvals for this mine? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Ben. Adani is the centre of many people's thoughts at the moment, and I'm interested that you've chosen to ask the people in opposition about it first, because it is the present government and the caretaker government, in fact, hours before going into caretaker mode, who are ticked off on approvals for it And I believe that's where the questions need to be asked. The current caretaker Environment Minister, do we know her name? Melissa Price, well done, has overridden advice from her department and from the CSIRO. There are the questions for you to ask. Now, in terms of Labor's policy, you're right. We do take climate change extremely seriously. Today, Bill Shorten has said that it is an emergency. Yes? And that means that we have to put together all the different parts of our policy, and that includes our energy policies and our environment policies and our renewables policies. Yeah? And we need to make it all work. Now, the technicalities with Adani itself are that it is in train. So there are limitations of what you can do, especially if you're actually in opposition at this point. Yeah? So you have to be in government, and then you have to use the processes that are available to you. And I do understand, because I've heard it a lot, that this is not necessarily a satisfactory answer at this point, but it is the one you have, because those are our processes. Now, when Labor is in government...
I'm sorry, Antoinette, we are going to have to stop you there.
I can't see them. I'm sorry, you were not in my line of sight.
So I'm going to ask Sonia, what's your position on the Adani coal mine?
Okay, thanks. Look, I think we should be steering away from fossil fuels. I think that ship's sailed, and all of our energy and efforts should be going into new technologies that we need to sustain, humanity. So I can't support Adani, and being as an independent, I can take very clear stances on things, unlike the major parties who tend to give very ambiguous answers. So no, I don't support Adani.
Mr. Darren Chester, as a major party holder or part of the coalition party, what are your thoughts on the Adani coal mine?
Thanks, Beck, and thanks, Ben, as well. The couple of points I would make in the short time available is we can't sit here in Gippsland and be within a few kilometres of Latrobe Valley and benefit enormously from the baseload reliable energy it's provided from brown coal, which has underpinned the wealth of Victoria and created thousands of jobs throughout our community for decades, and then tell the people of central Queensland you can't be the beneficiary of the job opportunities that exist from potentially a mine of this nature. So I don't think it's appropriate for us here in Gippsland to be telling the people of central Queensland they can't have jobs. But I take Ben's point largely in relation to the issue of emissions reductions, which I think is fundamental to his concern. The government's on target to meet its international commitments in terms of emissions reductions. It's also on target to have a 23.5% of Australia's energy mix coming from renewables by 2020. I think moving towards renewables is a sensible approach for our nation, but you don't rush to a position where you compromise your economic wealth and put your country at a disadvantage compared to other nations. And the only other point I'd make in relation to Adani, it's primarily obviously an export-driven market we're talking about. Coal has the capacity to help an emerging middle class in a developing country remove itself from poverty in large numbers, and I think it's reasonable for us as Australians to be securing employment for locals, but at the same time supporting the economic growth of a nation like India at the same time.
Perfectly on time. Kerri, Brewer, did you have some thoughts on that you would like to share?
Darren, you're right on there, I think, with everything you just said then about Adani. You're right in saying that we can't sit here and tell people they can't work up in Queensland. It does provide a lot of employment, and it's very difficult. There's always two sides to every argument. But we should start by looking at more renewable energy sources. But the fact is, we do need energy. Everything runs on energy. We all need electricity and warmth and gas and the rest of it. So we have to have something to run these things. So we'll definitely be looking into it and study both sides of the story and just come up with what's the best deal will be. Thanks.
Thank you, Kerri. And Deb Foskey as our Greens candidate.
Well, I think I'm rather lucky because I get to say straight out that the Greens oppose the opening of Adani and any new coal mines, and that we will work with whatever government is elected to phase out the mining and export of coal, because until we do that, we're not really facing the climate emergency. There's a few furphies in this argument, and I do recommend to everyone, if you've got access to it, The Conversation had a fantastic infographic on Adani this morning, and it just explains everything without bias, the ecological effects. But one of the things that becomes quite clear is the whole jobs thing, which drives too many. Well, in this case, it's a furphy, and we're going to be lucky to get 1,500 jobs out of that. In the initial phase, it was 10,000 and 1,500, and then, of course, there's probably a few indirect jobs. But the fact is that if we went into renewable energy, as we should and as the Greens will, there are 180,000 new jobs there, and in coal, mining and export and every bit of production, energy production, there's 79,800. So the other thing that is known, that Adani jobs will probably mean fewer jobs in coal mines elsewhere. Have I finished?
Yes, that is the red card.
Just started.
Thank you very much for the opposition, the kind of different view on that one, especially on the job front.
Our next question focuses attention on transport and comes from Alex Nair. Oh, drought, sorry. Yeah. Drought, sorry.
Good evening, everyone. It's great for you all to be here. With the worst drought in 30 years, causing a lot of hardship for farmers and their families, how will you support our young people who want to return or enter the agricultural industry, especially considering that 37% of business in Gippsland stems from the fishing and agricultural sector? Thank you.
This time we'll start at the other end and we'll start with Kerri.
Okay, thank you. So the United Australia Party a few years back tried to bring in what's called the Australia Fund, which was a fund specifically for exactly what we're in now, the drought or any natural disasters, and that was vetoed. It didn't get through. So again, if we make it into government, we will try to introduce that bill again and have the Australia Fund, which will be given directly, money directly given to farmers to help them for feed for their stock and water, and also help feed their own families. A lot of farmers are struggling just to do that. So that's what we will set up, the Australia Fund, it will be called. And so that will help in all times of natural disaster and hardship. We are behind Aussie farmers. What's grown in Australia, the money, generates around in Australia, and we've got to support our farmers. They're our blood. I think our farmers are our blood in Australia, and we need to support them and give them everything we can possibly give them and help them with everything we can possibly help them with. Thanks.
Thank you, Kerri. Would you like to have an answer for that, Darren?
Thank you, and terrific question. Obviously, right now in some parts of Gippsland, the drought is actually the worst in 100 years around the Sale region. Other parts of Gippsland are faring quite well. It's been quite patchy in that regard. The federal government and the state government and local government, I believe, need to work in a more holistic way on drought. We treat drought differently to fire and flood, which I think is wrong. When you think about the economic, the social and environmental impacts of those natural disasters, they all end up almost in the same position, except drought just takes a longer time to get there. So I think our approach to those natural disasters needs to be more whole of government and whole of governments. The federal government's put aside in the order of $6 billion for drought assistance across central Queensland, New South Wales and Gippsland. But again, your question is more about the future and the resilience for younger farmers. I don't believe our structures of support right now recognise that a lot of young farmers have off-farm income. So they have off-farm income which precludes them from getting the farm household allowance. So I've actually endeavoured through the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister and the Ag Minister to try and get some changes to farm household allowance access, so that makes it easier. I think the question more broadly is also about the water security that's available to local farmers. So we provided money for the MID 2030, $30 million for the next stage of that, which provides for more water security, and the same in the Lindo Flats with $10 million for water security. So our challenge, I guess, is to find ways to make sure we help farmers through the current hard times, but make sure they're in a position where they're financially viable and sustainable in the longer term.
Thank you, Darren. What are your thoughts with this one, Antoinette?
Now, if I've understood the question correctly, you're looking at drought and you want to know about how young people who want to go into fisheries and farming will be supported in the future. That's two parts of the question. Okay, well, the first part, looking at young people, is that Labor has a raft of policies that are about rural and regional young people being able to train in a variety of areas that include agriculture and, and fisheries. So there's your first one. So TAFE, uncapped places at universities, learning hubs, all of those things that underpin that educational basis for that. Now, looking at the drought, there needs to be a framework that is about immediate crisis management and making sure that families survive it. Now, if you're talking about a small family farm with still mortgages on the land, then this is really crippling. It's very difficult. Yeah? So crisis management, directed crisis management. We need medium term, and that's when those education things come in. So we help diversify the farming economy and allow people to have a variety of forms of income so they can ride this out. I think I might stop there before I get flashed again.
Thank you, Antoinette. Do you have any comments for that, Sonia?
Thanks. Look, I own a farm. I live up in the bush. I see what it's done to my friends and family. So it's interesting to hear some comments from people who don't know at first hand what they would do. To be honest, to keep young people in those kind of areas, we don't have the infrastructure. The money pretty much stops from the Latrobe Valley. You know, the further you go away, the less money that we get, the less resources we have. And if you want people to stay in the bush and be able to provide the city people with food and everything that they need, then you're going to have to stop encroaching on country people's liberties by having city-centric policies. And you have to understand that we need policy that is actually practical and implemented. One thing that you could do to have immediate relief, which is something that I would like to be looked at federally, is that they could change the legislation around rates, because my rates just doubled. And within 1 year, and I think that the local council should just not have the right to be able to put that sort of burden on farmers. It should only be a house and curtilage rate system, so that the land itself's not rated, just the house and curtilages. So that's something that you could immediately do, Darren, if you're really fair income about helping. And look, this is a pretty emotive sort of topic for me, but if you really, one thing I must say, the Dust and Drought concert that we had lifted the spirits. So maybe we need to bring some fun back into the equation to keep our young people up in the bush as well. So more money for the arts and music and things like that.
Just in the quick direct to Darren, I'll just give you a solid 30 seconds to respond to that one.
Very brief response. Sonia, I agree entirely that rate relief is an appropriate response, reducing the cost structure for farms, but you understand, and I'm sure you do, the rate system is administered by local government through the state government, and the federal government has no control over rates.
Thank you. And lastly, Deb Foskey.
Hi, I'll go pretty quickly because I've got a lot to say. In terms of fishing, which you did mention, globally we know fish stocks are lower and sustainable. We have to move to a sustainable fishing regime that will involve some transitional programs to support fisher people who are for some reason, because they are in unsustainable fisheries, have to move out of the area. I do have to ask you if we should really talk about drought as a natural disaster anymore. I think that we know all the climate change predictions said there would be more drought. What that means is we have to find a way of farming that can deal with the shocks of drought, the shocks of flood. We know that diversity in farming is a key, so that if one crop's not so good this year, the other one is. The other thing is the way that we deal with the land. And I went to a fantastic lecture last week with Charles Massey, who talks about regenerative farming and showed us pictures of bare paddocks on one side and growth in the middle of a drought. So it's about land management. I think young people are going to be the innovators. We have an ageing farming population, as you know. If we can bring young people back into it, fantastic. Fantastic for East Gippsland and Australia. So and we need to support that. I agree, the arts, activities, but we know that farmers, young people too, are resilient and they will make their own fun to some extent. And I better end there.
Thank you. Also, I'd just like to give Kerri a couple of seconds.
Sorry, I forgot to add before, and this is what I was saying about where the government needs to get the balance right and their priorities right, is that they spent $55,000 million on the NBN, which, by the way, is still not working properly, and they spent only $200 million on farmers. So that's where they need to get their priorities right.
Farmers like the NBN.
Sorry?
NBN benefits farmers too.
Yeah, well, when it works, it's still not working. I've got it at home, still not working.
Very true.
And they should have spent, not worried about it. They were trying to fix something that really wasn't broken.
Apologies, Kerri. All right, so we are going to jump on to the next question. So our next question comes from Lucy Caperso, and she'll be talking to us about education.
Hello everyone. If you were to step into any of Wellington's state secondary schools and compare their physical resources with the private schools, you would not be able to avoid recognising the enormous differences. Most of our halls and gyms, for example, where school communities come together for assemblies and etc., have not been refurbished in any way for over 30 years. It's difficult to instill pride and a feeling of value amongst students in these conditions. Where do you stand on supporting our state schools and ensuring they have adequate resources to ensure quality education?
As a state school attendee from our local area, Darren, what was your response to that one?
I think it's a terrific question, and it goes to the point of whether we believe there should be choice in the education system, and I believe there should be. I believe that there should be opportunities for parents, if they choose to send their child to an independent school, whether it's for religious reasons or from other reasons. But at the same time, every child should have access to a world-class education system. And I was one who attended Sale High School, and my own children attended local state schools where I live today. So I'm a strong believer in the state system. In terms of your question about infrastructure upgrades, I think the critical point, and I'm not looking to hand pass it too much, state schools are run by the state with funding provided by the federal government as well. So funding from the federal government during our time in government has increased every year, and that's only appropriate because we need to keep investing in new facilities and services. Now, I don't think the actual physical infrastructure is as critical to the quality of the teaching, which I think is the most fundamental aspect of education, is making sure we are investing in good quality teaching and getting opportunities for parents and the local community to be part of the school itself and be engaged in the school and their child's education. My wife's an education support officer in our hometown, and she's working with a lot of families where we perhaps aren't having that parental involvement or that parental responsibility being taken to get engaged in education as well. So I think educating a child is a whole of community response and activity, and not something solely that's going to be solved by government funding.
Thank you very much. Antoinette, what are your thoughts on this one?
Public schools are vitally important. They are a place where every student can go, every child can go. If you want to make a choice to not go there after that, fine, but they're our first place. The Labor Party is significantly reinvesting in our public schools. 23 million is coming into Gippsland if there's a Labor government, because we recognise that we haven't been funding need. We haven't been supporting our public systems. The government that we have has not been doing that. So that is actually part of our platform, and it's something we take very seriously.
Thank you very much. And we'll finish the left side with Deb.
A good education is key to the future of our country, and it's key to your futures as well. I've been a teacher, mostly in the state schools, but I did spend 6 months at Canberra Girls Grammar, and I thought it was incredibly ironical to be at a meeting where the staff was trying to work out how to spend $3,000 they had. And next, my daughter at a state school less than a kilometre away, they'd run out of art supplies for the year. And that's the kind of thing, as a teacher, I saw all the time. I also used to work in the Disadvantaged Country Areas program in East Gippsland, which some of you might remember the Schools Commission, which is where the Commonwealth did intervene in education to overcome disadvantage, in this case the disadvantage of rural areas experienced. And the other thing I'd also like to say, that the Commonwealth did intervene during the global financial crisis, when the Treasurer, who was then Wayne Swan, actually used expenditure on things like gymnasiums and school halls as a way of providing work in a flailing economy. And I think, things like the Schools Commission, which overcomes disadvantage, and direct grants from the Commonwealth are a recognition that at some of our schools the infrastructure is very, very sad. I've been to Bairnsdale High, for instance, just crying out for some pretty basic work.
Thank you very much for that acknowledgement. Sonia, what are your thoughts?
Well, coming from a very small town and watching our little school get closed, and then kids having to catch a bus, small kids, for an hour or two every day just to get to basic school and learn, it's pretty disheartening. So the further you get, or the closer you get to the city, the better facilities you seem to get. So it's the same thing. I think we should be focusing a lot of our financial funds to areas that really need them. I support education. It's going to make the difference for us of what we do next. If we've got to make sure that we look after the socially disadvantaged, and the better education that they can have access to in our state schools, the easier it will be to break those sorts of cycles. And also I think teachers need to be paid more, and I think we should start paying them more so we get better quality teaching, and it attracts people into that sector.
Thank you very much. And lastly, we'll hear from Kerri.
Thank you. So the UAP want to bring in a tax called the provisional tax. So this will allow businesses in Australia, because at the moment they pay on their earnings quarterly in advance, and we want to bring it in so they pay it at the end of the year after they've actually earned it. Now this should put a extra $70 billion into the economy, and from that $70 billion, the GST just alone on that will be $7 billion. Now with that $7 billion, what we would like to do with it is throw it as much as we can into education, schools, hospitals, infrastructure, emergency services. We want to get in, put that money in on the ground floor and all those places. I'm very, very passionate about having great education and opportunities for everyone that lives, no matter where you live in Australia. And I'm also very passionate about our healthcare system. We've got a wonderful healthcare system now, and I'd hate to see anything change in it. And they need all the support they can get. So that's where we would be pushing that $7 billion to to go. Thanks.
Our next questionnaire would be Luke.
Good evening, candidates. Sorry, I just need to make sure this is my question. The Coalition have promised a Headspace Centre in the Wellington electorate. What will the other parties do to support the mental health of young Gippslandians?
Thank you, Luke. I would like to ask Deb for that one.
Thanks, that's my question. I was actually at the last forum, I don't want to pop, here last November, where your questions alerted me to the significance of mental health issues to young people of Gippsland. I think it was something like 3 out of 6 questions addressed mental health. So I decided to follow that up, and I went and talked to the people at Headspace in Bairnsdale, and I've followed that up even further, and I've now been appointed the independent chair of Headspace Gippsland, because I feel that's a way that I can work with the young people. It's a co-chair job. And but nonetheless, I also come from a very rural area where these services don't reach. I think Headspace is fantastic. I'll do everything I can, but I feel that it doesn't answer all the questions. It's for 12 to 25-year-olds. Young people younger than 12 need interventions. Schools aren't always able to provide it. Some families are not healthy places to be. Mental health is bigger than just mental health services. It's about families that are stable. It's about families where there's no violence. It's a really big question. Young people experiencing mental health issues because they live in a world that is presenting them with so many challenges. It's a lot to be said, but I've finished.
Thank you, Deb. What are your responses to this, Sonia?
Okay, look, in 2010 I stood in the state election for the Liberal Party, and the Coalition happened to win the seat at the time, and one of the things that I was really passionate about was I procured $1.2 million for a one-stop health and mental wellbeing facility in Bairnsdale. It was interesting to see that the National Party misappropriated those funds, and instead of putting that money into the mental health sector, they decided to use it to make more public local council buildings instead. And there was also a youth centre that would have been put next to that facility, which I procured $350,000 worth of funding. So my question to everyone is can we trust the National Party when things like that are going on? Can we trust our governments to make sure that they do what they say they're going to do with their money when those monies are appropriated for certain things? And I was watching people getting, thrown out of the hospital with nowhere to go in Bairnsdale. The closest place was Traralgon. Thankfully now we've got the new Hope facility that's going to be built in Bairnsdale, which has been raised by, the people's money through charity and through fundraising. So sometimes what we've got to do is look at government, make sure that they're going to do what they say that they do, and make them accountable.
Thank you, Sonia. What's for Antoinette and Labor?
Okay, to speak to the first part of the question straight up, out of the $197 million that's being put aside for mental health commitments that Labor's putting forward, there is 4 Headspace plus trial sites in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane and regional Tasmania. And these are trial sites to see how the Headspace model and a community model work. So the idea is that we need evidence, we need to intervene on the basis of evidence. Essentially, does it work? Now, there's some other parts of the mental health spending that also can be accessed by young people. And one of those is that there's an increase in the number of appointments that you can get with psychologists from 10 to 30 on Medicare. So there's a first option, straight off crisis care and support. Now, there are other ways to support young people when either they're having crisis mental health issues or they are moving towards finding that's where they are. And they include supporting, making sure there are educational opportunities and employment opportunities, that they get employed decently and their public schools are supported and valued.
Thank you. Now we go to Kerri.
Oh, sorry. I actually agree with Sonia on this one. She's right. That's why I'm in this party, because we want to make whoever does run this country accountable for where they spend our money. And don't forget that, it's our money. And as I said before, the $7 billion that we would get from that provisional tax I was mentioning before, when I said hospitals, that encompasses all health services. So it will also encompass mental health services as well under that umbrella. So we're back to where that's exactly where we're going to put all that money. We're all very passionate about that, and we just want to make them all accountable for what they're going to do. And I've had experience in the healthcare system, so I know it pretty well from not only working in it, but having a son with a very bad illness as well in it. So I am very passionate and will make sure that the money goes exactly where they say it's going to go. Thanks.
Thank you. And lastly, what are your response to this, Darren?
Thank you, and terrific question. And I think it goes to the core of why you've already seen massive investment by both state and federal governments in mental health services. In here in Gippsland, you have a headspace in Maule and Sale, and you're right, there is a new service going to start, Maule and Bensdale, and a new service going to start in Sale. I think there's more opportunities for outreach into some of the smaller communities, as Sonia referred to. I also think there's more opportunities for using telehealth and other ways to reach more remote communities. You might be aware that the federal government announced $2 million for the primary health network to outreach into farming communities affected by the drought. And there's other programs underway right now, which I've sat in the classrooms and watched as teachers and other people who are engaged with students are getting educated on how to respond to mental health issues because they're having contact with them on a day-to-day basis. The complexity of the problem, though, dates right back in many cases to family violence in the first place. So reducing domestic and family violence and respect for women is critical to this whole suicide prevention. If people have been around violence and seen violence, they're have a greater propensity to perhaps be affected later in life. And Sonia touched on one program which I think she's been a bit unfair in her commentary. The Hope Centre in Bensdale came about following meetings that I had with the local community, and I secured more than $3 million for them to build a drug and alcohol rehabilitation centre, the first of its kind in regional Victoria, and it's going to be a fantastic facility, and the proof in the pudding is the fact that construction is underway right now. So governments often make funding commitments, and up to the local member to make sure they follow through and deliver them. But I guess this is one topic where we could spend a lot of time on. I hope we do get the chance to work constructively on the whole community response, not just the government response to suicide.
Thank you. I'll just give Sonia a couple of seconds to respond.
Yeah, look, Grant and Darren, I wasn't completely aware that you've put some input into the Hope facility, which is fantastic, but the fact was the money was there in 2010 for such a facility, and the National Party misappropriated those funds, and because I was actually responsible for procuring them through that means, and so I know quite well. But anyway, that's the past. We have to look to the future.
That we do. And on to our future question, which actually comes from myself. And I would like to ask our candidates a very straightforward question. What is your position on the settlement of refugees in Australia? And I'm going to start with Sonia.
Oh, lucky first. Look, I personally think that each person has merit and each person has the right to be on the planet. And if they're good people and they're doing the right thing, then we should have a duty of care. Humanity should look after each other. I've just heard that there's going to be more appropriation of population out into the country areas. Personally, I think it's going to be an interesting process to see how that amalgamation happens. And I would like to think that we would embrace people, and as long as they adhere to our culture and our moral codes of conduct and do the right thing, then we should look after each other. So I guess that's just a positive sort of affirmation for it. It does have other issues that come with it, I'm sure, and that's where our social structures and our support networks need to focus their energy on to be able to help and support people who are refugees.
Thank you very much, and we'll turn to Antoinette's thoughts on this one.
I'm a migrant here myself. My grandparents were migrants to a different country, and before that, 4 generations before that, they were migrants too. So it's part of my life, part of my understanding of the world. We need to exercise compassion and care for people who are seeking asylum. We need to make sure that they are not used in a way to make political points. We need to house them and support them while they are being processed, and that means looking after their medical needs and assessing their claims. The Labor Party has a series of positions on this that are about saying indefinite detention should not happen. The best place for resettlement for people is within the community. I also believe that we should exercise compassion, that we should address the issue seriously, rigorously and compassionately.
Thank you, Antoinette. Darren, what are your thoughts on this one?
Tough one in 90 seconds, but I'll say the first point is that governments must have control of their borders, but also say very clearly that we as Australians should be proud of our record in terms of refugee intakes. We have allowed and continue to allow people to settle in our country when they've sought asylum for legitimate reasons. But we can't allow uncontrolled access to our borders because there are people in the world who mean us harm. There are people who would seek to enter our country who don't want to just be part of the Australian way of life. They seek to do us harm. And the other point I'd make is in relation to the people smugglers themselves. Let's not give any suggestion of any noble intent on their behalf. This is a money-making proposition. They're organised crime where they're charging people to go on their leaky boats to come to Australia. So there's nothing noble about their profession either. And there's nothing humane about having policies, which we had under the former Rudd government, which proved disastrous with people arriving by the thousands and then dying at sea on their way to Australia. There was nothing humane about that. And once you have control of your borders, you're able to increase the number of refugees you can bring into the country, and we've done that. So we were at 13,500, we're moving towards 18,750 per year, and I think that's an appropriate response to what is a very difficult question when there's so many people on the move throughout the world at any given time. And the final point I'd make is you must have community support for your refugee program, and the only way you have community support if they believe the government is actually in control of the borders and that the people who are seeking to come here are genuine refugees and we can safely rehouse them in our communities. Australians are compassionate people, but they just want to make sure that the refugees are genuine and they're not being taken for a ride.
Thank you, Darren. And we'll go to Deb. What are your thoughts on this one?
Unfortunately, refugees have become a sort of a political football, and we're at the point now where if Liberal says something, Labor says it too. So we are not going to find any solutions to this problem from either major party. And just today I saw a post from the Solomon Islands going under. So many Pacific islands are. What we have now as a refugee problem is nothing to what we're going to see in the future. And a lot of those places see us as partly responsible for it because we're refusing to take a moral stand and action on climate change. As you know, the Greens would close the offshore camps. The joke is, of course, it's not a joke, it's not funny, but if the Solomon Islanders started coming here in their boats, we would push them away. That's the way our policy stands at the moment. And Labor's looking for more countries prepared to take refugees. And there's not going to be many of them because every country is going to be experiencing this problem. When people are desperate and need a home, they will go to the safest place. And just finally, I want to say, as a teacher, I taught many children who'd come in on the first boats, Vietnamese children. And it was a Liberal government, Fraser, that accepted those people. I tell you what, they were high achievers. We should be so proud that they came here and that they're now our doctors and our lawyers and everything else.
Thank you, Deb, and we'll finish with Kerri.
Thank you. I agree on this one with Darren. You made some great points there, Darren, and we do agree sometimes on things. And our target is the same with the people smugglers. It's the business and money, and that's where what we want to stop. But of course, we're welcoming of genuine refugees into this country. The difference is, I think, with us is that we'd like to see them processed straight away in Australia, not sent to islands or other camps anywhere else. We want them processed in Australia, make sure that everything's fine, that they're genuine refugees, and get them out into the community as quickly as humanly possible and help them as much as we can. We don't want them coming over like they have been on the boats, as Darren said. We just want to stop that. That's just inhumane. And we'd rather see them come over on a nice plane and land here and get processed straight away so there's no waiting around all the time. There've been people out there waiting 12 months, 2 years, 3 years to be processed, and I think this is not acceptable. So we have to change that and get them processed much quickly and get them out into society and the community and help them as much as we can.
Thank you very much. Personally, very appreciate those responses in hope for recognising our very multicultural community that we have. Our next question comes from Darren, and so we'll ask. Never mind. So now we would like to invite anyone who has another question if they would like to come up. They are welcome to come up. Or not. And if not, Youth Council has formed a question as well, and I'll ask Ivan to read that one for us.
Thank you. We fully support the Australian Labor Party in committing to appoint a youth minister if elected, but wonder what this will mean. How will your party or you ensure that you communicate and engage with young people's voices on all issues during your term if elected? I would like to start with Darren Chester with that one.
Thanks, Ivan. One of the most consistent ways I've engaged with younger people in my job has been by attending local primary schools and secondary schools on request. So a lot of schools will run a civics and citizenship program at a primary school level, or at secondary school level it might be more like a legal studies or a political class. And it's not to talk politics, it's to talk about the nature of government and how issues are resolved. And I've found those incredibly important in terms of forming my views and shaping my views, and sometimes changed my views on different issues. And one example would be in relation to the whole same-sex marriage debate. That came through a lot of conversations with a lot of young people over a period of years. More broadly, I'm someone who's involved in volunteering in community sporting activities. So I'm involved with the Surf Lifesaving Club and my kids' sport. So I'm around young people a lot. I'm fortunate my family is all under 22 and younger. So some of their issues around education, around access to opportunities in training are issues that I think are quite consistently faced by families in regional areas. So I get plenty of free advice from them. Wouldn't be too surprised to hear. But it's about being available to the younger people in their community and on their forums and provide opportunities for that to occur. I've explored ways that I might be able to do more online type forums, because it's a bit labour intensive, obviously going around school by school, whether you can do online forums with groups like Wellington Youth Council, maybe a way of addressing in the future as well.
Thank you. What are your thoughts with this one, Sonia?
Engaging in... I'll just put this on, yeah. So Well, young people, they're a great bunch, aren't they? Look, I come from a background of theatre, directing, singing and songwriting and all that kind of stuff. So if I was ever lucky enough to become a politician, I would really like to see a lot more energy put into those creative type areas for young people, because I just feel that there's a direct connection with everyone through music, through theory. It has no boundaries, no borders, it has no cultural borders, even languages. It can surpass all of that. So to engage with younger people, I would really look at the creative arts. I'd like to support that a lot more. Maybe even with youth allowance, I think that we should support our younger people a bit more financially, because it's a tough time. So I would be looking at what we can do in that regards to financially helping them. And that'd be a start. And I'd be very interested to see what your views are on that as well before everyone finishes. You maybe finish up with what you think would be the best. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. What are your comments with this one, Deb?
Oh, I was just about to turn that off. Sorry. Well, for a start, the Greens would give young people a voice, and we would give them a voice if they chose it at the age of 16, an optional opt-in to vote. So it's the world that they're facing is one that's been created by us and previous generations. It's really about time we gave them the chance to have a say, and the vote would be a damn good start. However, we've heard about informal ways that we might engage youth. There used to be, and there should be again, much more formal networks, something like a youth advisory council or whatever that government meets with regularly that is representative of young people. Each state could and used to have one, and there used to be funded youth network groups that worked with young people to empower them and to help them have their voice. We know that a lot of young people are carers and need support there. The youth allowance is like New Start, absolutely inadequate to give anyone a decent life, and the Greens' policy is to increase that by $75 a week. As a university lecturer at various times, I know the young people were off at work. It's just, how could you be a full-time student plus earning enough money to pay the rent and so on? There are many things to do, but I think starting with a youth advisory council would be a good one.
Thanks for that, Deb. And I'll now go on to Kerri for that one.
Deb, I'm with you on this one. I agree. It's just what I had written down as well. I think, first of all, politicians need to get out into the community a lot more than they do now. Unfortunately, most of the time we see them is right now when there's an election on, then we don't see them for a long time. So I think they need to get out a whole lot more and start and mixing much more with the community. And I agree with you, there should be youth advisory councils, and they should be in Canberra if it needs to be there, and the government should speak to those councils and at least probably twice a year, every 6 months, and see what the youth councils have come up with, what issues they're facing, and deal with it then. Yes, I agree with you that there should be youth advisory councils, so we need to engage with our youth and get their voice out there. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, Antoinette.
Well, the thing that strikes me listening to these answers and having sat here and been required to answer a whole different range of questions is that there's real diversity in youth experience. So the first challenge we have is to say, how do we cover that diversity? Now, a Minister for Youth is a structural way to bring the broader youth issues into government, and it brings it into government and it frames interventions. But it does that through research and evidence and interaction. So there's the young people, the organisations that you have, like this one, that feed into government, that now have a place to take their resolutions, if you like. There's also the capacity for our university researchers, the ones who work in education, who work with students all the time, who are studying needs like young women who are having babies while they're still at school, how we address those needs. They get fed into government. So those are our structures. What Darren was mostly talking about was our everyday individual interactions. And all of us live in the community. We're all part of the community, and we mix with elderly, and we mix with youth, and we mix with youth who are 15, and we mix with youth who are 25. Yeah? So how we put together our personal experiences and our greater knowledge about the bigger picture. Now, how have I gone answering that question?
Thank you for that one. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, probably connecting with like local youth groups and organisation would be an idea as well. Also, like what Darren said and some of you guys said as well, would be a great idea because, yeah, there's a lot of issues going around, especially with the youths nowadays. So, yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I also have another question that came in just before, and I'm going to read it out on behalf of that person. Recently, many students, including students from our local area, took a part in a strike for climate change. What do you take from this and what is your response? We're going to start with Kerri.
Okay, so climate change. It's one of those topics that you're either in or you're out. You either agree or you disagree. This is one of those ones I'm sitting on the fence, and I don't normally sit on the fence because I'm not really a fence sitter, but on this one I am because, first of all, I don't like the title climate change because when you say that, you immediately think of up here in the sky, something going on happening or the weather, but I think it should be more something on the lines of human impact, the human impact that we have on the earth, and I think we've only got one earth, that's it. We don't get a second chance and we have to look after it as best we can and do what we can to look after it in the best ways. I think we've come a long way. Back in the 17th century and 18th centuries, we had the Industrial Revolution when we had big factories going up, smoke coming out. They were letting things into the waterways and into the soil, and we didn't know any better then, but we've come a long way since then. We've learnt. We know a whole lot better, but we're still not there yet. And I think we just all have to work together. I think Australia does a pretty good job. We've still got a long way to go, but I think all countries in the world have to work together. So that's what we need to do. We've got to look after this earth. Thanks. The red card.
Thank you very much. What were your thoughts on the strike for climate action, Deb?
I think Greta Thunberg, not sure I'm pronouncing that right, you probably know, is going to be seen as an iconic figure in times to come because she's brave enough to stand up and recently spoke to the World Economic Forum, which is where all the power, a lot of the corporate power in our world lies. And she said, I want you to act as you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if your house is on fire, because it is. And that's why young people are out there in the streets. I can't say that I, like so many Greens and many others, felt so proud when we saw the young people taking action. I belong to a generation that took action way back in ancient times, back in the 70s, to stop the Vietnam War. And it works. It's empowering to work together. It builds on itself so that one little success becomes another. And the fact is that while we could say we're facing pessimistic times, we don't, and we aren't if we act. We know we still have that time. And young people are trying to grab governments by the shoulders and shake them into the kind of action that we need. If with the coalition's policies, if every country in the world had them, we will have 4 degrees by 2050. That's not good enough.
Thank you, Deb. What did you take from the day, Sonia?
We'll be very interested to see what the science brings us in the future and the data, because as we know, science-based information is always subject to change as data and information comes in. So at this point in time, we have science saying that we need to wake up to ourselves, so let's just do that. Let's make the policy and the changes that are the best for everybody. And I think it's great that young people get up and are motivated and have their say. As I said when I first spoke earlier, that they should be able to vote if they choose at 16 and have a say in these types of things. But also, let's look at this as an opportunity. Each one of you, like we're crying out to government to change, but the power's with the people. So let's start taking responsibility ourselves. Let's make change by every individual choice that we do, because there are things that I can do, that you can do, that we can all do daily by making the right choices. So the power is with you, so don't feel despondent. Just make the change for yourself. So that might mean instead of buying plastic bottles or throwaway items or living in our consumeristic society, we do make those choices, we do make that change. And then also lobby Darren. He's going to be the man. He's got another term coming up in front of him. Write to him, pester him, make sure he's doing what his job is for you, because that's what he's elected for. So that's what I would do if I was in your shoes. So good on you. Keep up the good work.
Darren, what's your response to that, or to our question?
Well, I'll deal with the direct question about the protests themselves, and I fully respect people's right for peaceful protests. I'm not sure that I would encourage people to take a day off school to do it. I would have thought you could actually achieve the same result on a weekend at a time when we have student absenteeism rates in Gippsland, which are quite concerning. So I would argue that probably best was on a weekend, but I'm not going to tell parents whether they can let their kids go to a protest or not. That's up to them. I do appreciate the numbers of people involved indicates a level of community concern about an important issue. But I'd also stress that I think we need to be honest with younger generations and all Australians when we say that there's less than 2% of total global emissions come from Australia. There is no Australian solution to climate change in isolation. We need to work with our world partners to achieve real outcomes. So we need to be honest with people about that point. Less than 2% actually comes from Australia. Now, in terms of the government action, there has been massive investment in renewable energies, about $11 billion worth of investment last year in renewable energies. I think we're 7th in the world now in terms of our investment in renewable energy as we go forward. And I'm going to say if the young people who want to take action, as Deb referred to, one of the actions they can really take is get involved in groups like Landcare and Coast Care as well and take practical environmental action on a daily basis, as well as the protest action. I would encourage people to get involved in local community action days and cleanups and things that actually can make a real difference in the local environment at the same time as maintain their interest in the, I guess, the more global picture.
Thank you, Darren. Antoinette?
The first thing I'd like to say is that we should not anticipate the results of the democratic process. It's up to the people to vote. They do so on Saturday.
Safe seat, mate. Safe seat. Sorry. I'm just a realistic person.
Apologies, Sonia. We'll let Antoinette finish.
Sorry. Yes, indeed. You are questioning the people. You are predicting the people. The people have the right to go and vote. And we may look at the statistics. We may make guesses, but it is not appropriate to make the call. Right, now I will start the clock on my answer. It's pretty clear that your representative in the federal government does not think your house is on fire. I do. Climate change has been with me. Global warming has been with me since I was a child. People were talking about it then. It's something we need to take seriously. We take it seriously and we have the capacity to act, and we must. What do I take from the students' climate strike? I take heart. I see a way to make change. I see people who want to act, and that is what we need. We want a better future. We want to be able to be positive. We want to make the future great, but we must act. So I take heart.
Thank you. And yep. Is there another question? No. Yep. That will be all for tonight. I would like to thank everyone, all the candidates that came here, and the audience as well. Also, if you guys in the crowd would like to take out their smartphones, there would be something on the screen there that would you like, if you can log in. We also have a hard copy and a pen if you would like to do so. And yeah, hold up.